The red and blue lights painted Detective Raymond Foster's driveway in alternating waves of accusation, transforming a peaceful Saturday afternoon into the kind of nightmare scene he'd investigated dozens of times but never imagined living through. 3 police cruisers sat with engines idling, their light bars creating a rotating spectacle that drew neighbors from their homes like moths to flame. 6 officers had responded to the call, an excessive show of force for what dispatch had described as suspicious individuals engaging in threatening behavior, possibly armed, creating immediate neighborhood safety concerns. Raymond's crime? Playing basketball with his 12-year-old daughter Maya in their own driveway. His hands were raised now, palms open toward the officers, modeling the compliance that might keep both of them alive. Maya stood beside him, her small frame trembling, her basketball abandoned in the street where it had rolled during those first terrifying moments when the cruisers appeared. Each bounce of that ball had sounded like a countdown to catastrophe, rubber against asphalt, marking the seconds before everything changed. "Sir, I need you to keep your hands visible," the young officer approaching them said, his voice pitched higher than training manuals recommend, hand hovering near his service weapon with the kind of nervous energy that transforms routine encounters into tragedies. "Both of you, don't make any sudden movements." Raymond had been in law enforcement for 23 years, had worked patrol for 7 years before making detective at 35, had stood exactly where this officer was standing, had responded to calls just like this one, had approached citizens with that same mix of authority and anxiety. But now he was on the other side of that dynamic, and the mathematics of American policing had rewritten every equation in his favor, into something dangerous and unpredictable. The officer couldn't have been more than 25, fresh-faced and following protocol, with the rigidity of someone who'd been told the streets were war zones and every encounter was potentially lethal. "I need to see identification," the officer responded, protocol overriding reason. "Move slowly. Tell me what you're reaching for." "My wallet, back right pocket. It has my badge and ID." Maya's hand found his, small fingers gripping tight with a desperation that broke Raymond's heart into pieces. She was 12 years old, honor roll student, played clarinet in the school band, volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends. She'd never been in trouble, never given anyone reason to fear her, and now she was learning the lesson Raymond had prayed she'd never need to learn. That her own skin could be probable cause, that existing while black was inherently suspicious, that home wasn't always sanctuary from suspicion. "Dad," Maya whispered, and the single word contained universes of fear and confusion and betrayal. "It's okay, baby," Raymond lied, because nothing about this was okay. "We're okay. Just stay calm." Behind the police cruisers, neighbors had emerged from their homes to watch the spectacle. Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down looked horrified, hand covering her mouth. The Johnson family, also black, also frequent targets of neighborhood suspicion, stood on their lawn with expressions that mixed sympathy and recognition. They'd been through versions of this before. And across the street, standing on her porch with arms crossed and satisfaction carved into her expression like a monument to vindication, was Carol Winters, HOA president, self-appointed guardian of Meadowbrook Heights, community standards. The woman who'd spent the past 8 months making life miserable for every non-white family in the neighborhood with her constant complaints, her endless citations for minor infractions, her suspicious glares and barely veiled hostility. She'd made the call. Raymond could see it in the way she watched, in the slight nod she gave when the officers arrived, in the way she'd positioned herself to observe the outcome of her decision to transform a father-daughter basketball game into a criminal investigation. Her expression held the satisfaction of someone who'd finally caught the criminals she'd always suspected lurked behind their facade of normalcy. The officer was examining Raymond's credentials now, and shame was beginning to flicker across his young face as he processed what this call had become. "Playing basketball," Raymond interrupted, allowing steel into his voice now that identity had established some protection. "With my 12-year-old daughter in my own driveway on my own property. That's the suspicious activity. That's the weapon you were warned about." He gestured toward the basketball in the street, and the absurdity of the situation seemed to crystallize in that single object, a child's toy treated as a threat, a normal Saturday afternoon transformed into a police incident, a father's simple joy with his daughter weaponized by a neighbor who'd decided that black people existing in her line of sight constituted an emergency. "The caller—" The officer tried again. "The caller lied," Raymond stated flatly, "and nearly got me killed, nearly got my daughter traumatized for the crime of being black while playing basketball." That's when the black government sedan pulled onto their street. Raymond recognized the car before its door opened. Recognized the make and model used by federal agencies, recognized the deliberate way it parked half a block down, as if assessing the situation before committing to intervention. And when the driver's door opened and a woman stepped out in a navy blue suit that spoke of courtrooms and congressional hearings and federal authority, Raymond felt something shift in his chest. His eldest daughter Jasmine had been driving from Washington, D.C. for a surprise visit, had texted earlier that she was a few hours away, but hadn't specified exactly when she'd arrive. She'd wanted to surprise them, wanted to spend the weekend catching up with family, wanted to watch Maya's basketball game on Sunday, and help with dinner, and just be home for a few precious days. Her timing was devastating and perfect. Jasmine Foster stopped mid-stride as she registered the scene. Police cruisers with lights still flashing, officers clustered around her, father and sister, hands still raised in submission, neighbors watching from safe distances, the whole awful tableau of casual racism made manifest in her family's driveway. Raymond watched his daughter's expression transform in real time. The fatigue from 6 hours of driving disappeared. The casual clothes she'd chosen for comfort suddenly looked like a uniform of authority. Her posture shifted from tired traveler to federal prosecutor in the space between heartbeats, and when she reached into her jacket, every officer's attention snapped toward her. "Credentials," she announced clearly, moving slowly and deliberately as she produced the black leather wallet that contained her federal identification. "Assistant U.S. Attorney Jasmine Foster, Federal Bureau of Investigation. What's the situation here?" The young officer who'd been interrogating Raymond looked like he'd just been told the pop quiz was actually the final exam. "Ma'am," we responded to a 911 call reporting suspicious activity. "Suspicious activity," Jasmine repeated, walking toward them with the measured steps of someone who'd walked into hostile courtrooms and emerged victorious. "Could you describe this suspicious activity for me, officer?" The caller reported individuals engaging in threatening behavior, possibly armed. "And what did you observe when you arrived?" Jasmine interrupted, her voice carrying that particular tone of prosecutorial precision that expects answers, not excuses. The officer hesitated. "Two individuals in the driveway." "Two individuals," Jasmine said. "Could you describe them?" "An adult male and a juvenile female." "Black," Jasmine finished. "The suspicious activity was two black people existing in their own space. Is that accurate?" Silence. "Officer, I need you to answer the question. Was there any actual threatening behavior? Any weapons? Any legitimate cause for this response?" "No, ma'am." You called the police because you saw black people and decided that was suspicious, Jasmine corrected, walking toward Carol's porch now, each step deliberate and unavoidable. Before you repeat that lie, you should know exactly who I am and what I do. I'm an assistant U.S. attorney specializing in civil rights prosecutions. I investigate and prosecute pattern and practice violations, systemic discrimination, the use of law enforcement as weapons against protected classes. She stopped at the base of Carol's porch steps, and her presence seemed to fill the entire street. You've called the police on black families in this neighborhood 17 times in the past 8 months. I know because I made 3 phone calls while driving here and obtained the dispatch records. 17 false reports, 0 legitimate emergencies, 100% of your calls targeting people based on race. Carol's face had drained of color. That's not... I was just concerned for neighborhood safety. Safety from what? Jasmine's voice could have cut through steel. From my father? A decorated detective with 23 years of service and 0 complaints? From my baby sister, a 12-year-old honor roll student who volunteers at animal shelters? From the Johnson family, who are both teachers? From the Martinez family, who own a restaurant that employs 15 people? What exactly were you protecting this neighborhood from, Mrs. Winters? The street had gone completely silent. Even the police radios seemed to have quieted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath for Carol's answer. But Carol had no answer that wouldn't condemn her, and her silence was its own confession. Here's what's going to happen, Jasmine continued, pulling out her phone with the casual confidence of someone who'd done this before, who knew exactly how the system worked because she was part of the machine. Airy of justice. Officer Chen here is going to take your official statement about today's call, and you're going to be honest about what you actually observed, which was my father and sister playing basketball in their own driveway. No weapons, no threats, no suspicious activity, just black people existing. I want a lawyer, Carol said, the words coming out strangled. That's absolutely your right, Jasmine acknowledged, and you should definitely exercise it because you're going to be charged with filing a false police report. That's a misdemeanor in this state, up to 1 year in jail and a fine of up to $5,000. But Mrs. Winters, that's just the beginning of your problems. She gestured toward the gathered neighbors, many of whom were recording the exchange on their phones. Because in addition to criminal charges, I'm going to recommend that the Department of Justice open a formal investigation into this neighborhood's HOA practices, pattern and practice of using law enforcement to harass residents based on protected characteristics. That's federal jurisdiction. That comes with consequences that will reshape not just your life, but this entire community.
You can't do this, Carol protested weakly. I have rights. You absolutely have rights, Jasmine agreed. The same rights you just violated when you weaponized police against my family, the same rights the Johnson family has, and the Martinez family and every other family you've harassed with your false emergency calls. See, Mrs. Winters, rights work both ways. You have the right to call the police. You don't have the right to lie to them to target people you don't like. Officer Chen had moved closer to Carol's porch, notepad out, his expression grim, with the recognition that he'd been used as a tool of harassment. Ma'am, I do need an official statement. Would you prefer to give it here or at the station? Here, Carol whispered, and Raymond could see her entire world collapsing in real time. While Officer Chen took Carol's statement, Jasmine made her phone call to the DOJ. Raymond listened to his daughter speak with clinical precision about civil rights violations, about patterns of discriminatory enforcement, about the systematic use of emergency services to target protected classes. She rattled off case law, cited specific federal statutes, outlined the investigative framework with the fluency of someone who'd built entire prosecutions around exactly this kind of behavior. Maya was still holding Raymond's hand, but she'd stopped crying. She was watching her sister work,
watching justice happen in real time, watching someone with actual power and authority stand up for them in a way that made the badge on Raymond's belt feel suddenly inadequate. The other neighbors had begun approaching, sensing that something significant was happening. Mrs. Patterson came first, tears in her eyes. "Raymond, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Carol was calling the police on families. This is awful." The Johnsons came next, and Mr. Johnson's expression was tight with recognition. He called the cops on us 3 months ago. Said we were loitering suspiciously while we were checking our mail. I filed a complaint with the HOA, but nothing happened. "It happened to us too," said Mrs. Martinez, joining the growing group. "Our son's birthday party last summer. She called and said there was a suspicious gathering and potential gang activity. My son was turning 15 and had friends over for cake." One by one, the stories emerged. The Chen family, cited for aggressive behavior when their teenager walked home from school carrying a backpack. The Williams family, harassed about excessive noise when their church group sang hymns during Sunday dinner. The Anderson family questioned about unauthorized commercial activity when they had a garage sale. Every story followed the same pattern. Non-white families living their lives, Carol Winters deciding their existence was suspicious, police being weaponized to make them feel unwelcome and afraid. Jasmine documented every testimony on her phone, building the case in real time. This is exactly what the DOJ needs to see: a pattern of discriminatory enforcement targeting protected classes, enabled by an HOA structure that gave one person unchecked authority to harass residents. Officer Chen finished taking Carol's statement, and the woman looked diminished somehow, as if the weight of consequences had physically compressed her. "Mrs. Winters, I'm issuing you a citation for filing a false police report. You'll receive a court date in the mail within 2 weeks." "This is insane," Carol said weakly. I'm not the criminal here." "Actually," Jasmine interrupted, you are. Filing a false police report is a crime. Using emergency services to harass people based on their race violates federal civil rights laws, and if the DOJ investigation finds what I think it'll find, you could be facing charges that make that misdemeanor look like a parking ticket. The real twist came 3 days later when Jasmine's contacts at the DOJ moved with unusual speed to launch a preliminary investigation. What they discovered exceeded even her expectations. Carol Winters hadn't just been targeting families randomly. She'd kept detailed records, a spreadsheet tracking every non-white family in the neighborhood, noting their daily activities, their visitors, their routines. She documented everything in what she apparently believed was evidence of criminal activity, but was actually a roadmap of systematic discrimination. The spreadsheet had categories: suspicious vehicles, which meant any car she didn't recognize in a non-white family's driveway; aggressive behavior, which meant children playing outside; property violations, which meant anything from basketball hoops to culturally specific decorations; loitering, which meant standing in one's own yard. She'd even rated each family on a risk assessment scale, and the correlation between darker skin tones and higher risk ratings was so blatant that the DOJ investigator had actually laughed, that bitter laugh that comes from seeing prejudice documented with such unintentional honesty that denial becomes impossible. She literally created a system to track and harass every non-white family in the neighborhood, the investigator told Jasmine during a conference call. And she documented everything. It's like she wanted to be caught. But the deeper investigation revealed something even more troubling. Carol Winters hadn't been acting alone. The HOA board had known about her activities, had received complaints from targeted families, and had done nothing. Some board members had actively encouraged her efforts, praising her vigilance and commitment to neighborhood standards. Email chains revealed discussions about how to maintain the character of Meadowbrook Heights, with thinly veiled racist language about preserving property values and protecting the community's culture. One board member had explicitly written that they needed to make certain families feel unwelcome before others like them decide to move in. The HOA had become a systemic engine of discrimination, and Carol Winters had been its most enthusiastic operator. When the DOJ announced formal charges, not just against Carol Winters individually, but against the HOA as an organization for enabling and encouraging civil rights violations, the neighborhood erupted, emergency meetings were called, board members resigned en masse. The HOA's insurance company announced they wouldn't cover civil rights litigation. Property owners began receiving letters explaining that they were potentially liable for the organization's actions. Carol Winters hired a lawyer who took one look at her spreadsheet and the documented evidence and reportedly told her to accept whatever plea deal was offered because taking this to trial would be prosecutorial suicide. The emergency community meeting 3 weeks after the incident was packed beyond capacity. The small clubhouse couldn't hold everyone, so they moved to the neighborhood park, where over 300 residents gathered under the autumn sun to decide the future of Meadowbrook Heights. Raymond stood at the front with Jasmine, Maya, and representatives from every family that had been targeted: the Johnson family, the Martinez family, the Chen family, the Williams family, the Anderson family. 8 families in total, representing dozens of individuals who'd been systematically harassed for the crime of existing while non-white. Jasmine spoke first, and her voice carried across the crowd with the authority earned through years of making people listen. What happened to my father and sister wasn't an isolated incident. It was the inevitable result of a system designed to make certain families feel unwelcome, a system where one person's prejudice was enabled by institutional indifference. She outlined the DOJ's findings, and as the details emerged, the spreadsheet, the emails, the documented pattern of discrimination, many white residents looked genuinely shocked. They'd known Carol was difficult, known she made excessive complaints, but many hadn't understood the racial dimension of her activities. "This is happening in our name," Mrs. Patterson said, standing to address the crowd. "I live on this street. I see these families every day, and I didn't speak up when I should have. I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want to assume the worst about Carol, but my silence enabled this." Others stood to echo her sentiment, and Raymond watched as a community began the painful process of acknowledging its complicity, but not everyone was contrite. "This is political correctness run amok," one older man shouted from the back. "Carol was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. Safe from children playing basketball," Jasmine shot back. "Safe from families having birthday parties. Safe from people checking their mail. Mr. Henderson, let me be absolutely clear. There is no version of this story where Carol Winters was the good guy. She committed crimes. The HHOA enabled those crimes, and everyone who stayed silent was complicit. The silence that followed was heavy with recognition. Here's what happens next," Jasmine continued. "The HOA, as it currently exists, is finished. The DOJ investigation will likely result in a consent decree requiring oversight of any future homeowners association. Carol Winters will face criminal charges and civil lawsuits. Board members who enabled her actions may face liability. And this neighborhood has a choice to make about what kind of community it wants to be." Raymond stepped forward then, and his voice was quieter than Jasmine's, but carried just as much weight. "I'm a detective. I've spent 23 years in law enforcement. I know what it feels like to be the person with the badge and the authority. But that day, with my daughter, I learned what it feels like to be on the other side, to have my own safety and freedom depend on whether a nervous officer makes the right split-second decision." He looked at Maya, who stood beside him with the kind of strength that breaks hearts. "My daughter is 12 years old. She's never been in trouble. She gets straight A's. She volunteers with animals because she loves helping creatures that can't help themselves. And she learned that day that none of that matters when someone decides her skin color is suspicious. His voice cracked slightly. I can't undo that lesson. I can't take away her fear. But maybe we can make sure no other child.
The DOJ investigation had resulted in a settlement requiring the old HOA to pay $400,000 in damages to the 8 families who'd been targeted, funded by a special assessment on all property owners who'd been members during Carol's reign. The money didn't undo the harm, but it represented accountability in the most tangible form available. But the real changes were smaller and more profound. Raymond stood in his driveway on a Saturday afternoon, watching Maya play basketball with her friends, a diverse group of kids from the neighborhood who moved between houses freely now without fear or suspicion. The Johnsons had installed a basketball hoop too, and sometimes games stretched across multiple driveways with parents and kids mixing in the kind of community that should have existed all along. Jasmine visited more frequently now, her FBI work taking her across the country, but her heart pulling her back to Meadowbrook Heights more often. She'd been promoted after the case, her handling of the situation cited as exemplary prosecution of civil rights violations. But she still made time to surprise her father and sister, still showed up for basketball games and family dinners. Today she was teaching Maya some defensive moves, their laughter mixing with the sound of the ball bouncing on concrete. The sound that had once been treated as suspicious now echoed freely through the neighborhood, a testament to transformation. Mrs. Patterson approached with fresh lemonade, something she did regularly now, a small act of repentance for her silence, though Raymond had long since forgiven her. "Beautiful afternoon," she said, watching the game. "It is," Raymond agreed. "I still think about that day," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "The police cars. Your face. Maya crying. And I think about how I almost didn't say anything at the meeting, how I almost let it continue. But you did speak up."
And the smell of jerk chicken mixed with burgers and hot dogs in the kind of cultural fusion that would have given Carol Winters an aneurysm. "Mr. Foster," the father called out. "You coming over later? Got plenty of food. Wouldn't miss it." Raymond called back. This was the neighborhood now. Not perfect. Nowhere was perfect. Still had its problems, its conflicts, its difficulties. But the foundational principle had changed. People belonged here not despite their differences, but because of them. The community was stronger for its diversity, richer for its varying perspectives, better for having faced its ugliness and chosen transformation. Jasmine intercepted a pass, drove toward the hoop, and made a perfect layup. Maya and her friends erupted in cheers, and the sound carried across the neighborhood like a declaration of victory. "You know what I realized?" Jasmine said later, as they sat on the porch drinking lemonade and watching the sun set over Meadowbrook Heights. "Carol Winters actually did us a favor." "How do you figure that?" Raymond asked. She was so blatant, so systematic, so unsubtle about her discrimination that she forced everyone to see it. If she'd been smarter, more careful, more subtle, the way most racism operates, it might have continued indefinitely. People could have kept ignoring it, explaining it away, pretending it wasn't happening. She gestured toward the neighborhood, toward families gathering for the barbecue, toward kids playing in yards without fear, toward a community that had been forced to confront its worst impulses and had chosen better. But she kept that spreadsheet. She documented everything. She made it impossible to deny. And in doing that, she gave us the evidence we needed to tear down the whole rotten system and build something better. Maya joined them on the porch, sweaty from the game and grinning. "Are we going to the barbecue?" Raymond thought about lying, about protecting her from the truth, but Maya deserved honesty. "Sometimes," he admitted, "that fear doesn't just disappear. What happened to us? It leaves a mark. But you know what else I feel now?" "What?" "Proud. Of you for being so brave that day. of your sister for standing up for us, of this neighborhood for choosing to change, and of myself for raising daughters who understand that injustice doesn't have to be permanent if you're willing to fight it." Jasmine put her arm around Maya. "Carol Winters called the cops on us thinking we were powerless, thinking she could use the system against us without consequences. She didn't know Dad was a detective who understood exactly what she'd done. She didn't know I was a federal prosecutor with the authority to make her life a living hell. She didn't know we had the knowledge, the resources, and the determination to fight back." She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd won battles and intended to win many more. But even if we hadn't had those advantages, what she did was still wrong, still illegal, still deserving of consequences. We just happened to be in a position to make sure those consequences actually arrived. "What if we hadn't been?" Maya asked. "What if you weren't FBI? What if Dad wasn't a detective?" "Then it would have been harder," Jasmine acknowledged, "but not impossible, because there are people like me in every city, every state, every community who spend their careers fighting for people who can't fight for themselves, and there are laws that protect everyone, not just people with badges and credentials." She looked at her sister directly. "What Carol Winters didn't understand is that justice doesn't require you to be powerful. It just requires you to be persistent, to document everything, to speak up, to refuse to accept that harassment is normal. And eventually, if you push hard enough and long enough, the system responds." "Does it always?" Maya asked, and the question contained more wisdom than most adults possessed. "No," Jasmine admitted. Not always, not fast enough, not fairly enough. That's why the work continues. That's why we keep fighting, because every Carol Winters who faces consequences makes the next one think twice. Every community that transforms makes the next one easier. Every victory, no matter how small, changes the landscape." The sun had set fully now, and the neighborhood was lit by porch lights and string lights and the glow from the barbecue across the street. Someone had brought a speaker, and music drifted through the evening air, a mix of genres that represented a dozen different cultures sharing the same space. "Come on," Raymond said, standing and offering his hand to Maya. "Let's go eat, and let's celebrate what we've built here." As they walked toward the gathering, Raymond looked back at his house, the driveway where everything had changed, the porch where they'd watched justice unfold, the home that had been briefly transformed into a crime scene and was now simply home again. Carol Winters had called the cops on his daughter. She'd expected intimidation, compliance, and the satisfaction of making unwanted neighbors feel unsafe. She'd gotten an FBI prosecutor, a DOJ investigation, criminal charges, civil liability, and the complete destruction of the system she'd built to harass people she considered inferior. The power reversal had been absolute. The justice had been real. And the neighborhood that emerged from the ruins of her discrimination was stronger, kinder, and more honest than what had existed before. Sometimes the worst moments create the best opportunities for change. Sometimes casual racism meets federal prosecution and learns exactly what consequences feel like. Sometimes a father playing basketball with his daughter becomes the catalyst for transformation. Carol Winters had learned these lessons too late, but she'd learned them completely. And Meadowbrook Heights, forced to see itself clearly for the first time, had chosen to become something better. That choice, more than any legal victory, was what mattered most. That choice was what would last. That choice was justice.